Hi, everyone. Welcome to Thanks for Sharing. I am your host, Jackie Pack. And let me just double check. Yep, everything's working. Okay, sounds good. I am Jackie Pack, still getting used to my new podcast equipment. Still have some things I need to save up for and buy to get everything going. And this is episode 280. That's a lot of episodes. I'm sometimes surprised. Somebody the other day was asking me, I mentioned something about, oh, I'm working on my podcast. And they were like, oh, how long have you been doing a podcast? I don't even remember how many years. And I said, well, I have 279 episodes out. And they were like, that's kind of a lot. And I, was thinking afterwards, like, that is a lot. So anyway, episode 280, that means I'm coming up on episode 300. And I'll have to do something for episode 300. If you have ideas, please share them with me. I'm looking around for what other podcasts have done when they've reached a milestone like episode 300. So, anyway, I'm thinking about that. If you have thoughts on that, feel free to comment in the platform that you are watching this or listening to this and let me know. I'm open to suggestions. So, I wanted to talk this episode about family reunions. Family reunions, as many of you know, are summer traditions for most families, which is why July, the month that we're in right now when I'm recording this, is National Family Reunion Month. It's usually a time when relatives reconnect with each other, they welcome new family members. A family reunion is supposed to be a celebration of love and connection. And, I think after several years of isolation due to COVID-19, reconnecting with family has never seemed more important for a lot of families. Studies show that family gatherings positively impact the physical, mental, and emotional well-being of all family members, especially children. From kids hearing stories about their family history or trying recipes that have been passed down over the years, family reunions can help kids form identities about who they are. The relationships and bonding that can happen are so incredibly worth the trouble often of family reunions. And having a family reunion is the best way to celebrate what some see as society's most important building block, the family. So, as I've been looking at different articles about family reunions, reading different things about family reunions, a family reunion can vary from a simple afternoon get together to a whole weekend getaway. Family reunions can strengthen bonds and relationships. Family reunions can span a long 4-day weekend or just a few hours on a certain day. From what I've read, often this depends on how far people travel to attend the gathering. It's often thought that the more the distance people are traveling is to be at the reunion, the longer the span of the reunion lasts. But that isn't always the case either. And for a lot of families, they don't need a large event to meet. There can be a gathering as small as a family meal that can promote stability and encourage attachment. Building connections and security are vital to a child's development, even if this is within their small nuclear family. So, is there a difference between a family gathering or a family reunion? I'm going to quote somebody that I came across and her thought on this process. Her name is Margaret Plotkin, and she says, quote, in my mind, at least, anytime a lot of family members get together, Christmas, Thanksgiving, 4th of July cookout, with all of the aunts and cousins and grandkids, that's a family gathering. They tend to encompass up to 4 generations of direct descendants from one original couple. A family reunion is more of a gathering of the diaspora. This is when you make a point of inviting every collateral relative, no matter how distant the connection or how far away they live, for a chance to reconnect with people they haven't seen in years and meet the new additions. This is when the second and third cousins get invited, as well as the first cousins. We're talking about the 5th and 6th generations of descendants. Weddings and funerals are a kind of family reunion, but some families like to organize them for their own sake. End quote. Now, in my research, I did find out that family reunions are mostly an American tradition. And family reunions in America date back to the emancipation, when formerly enslaved people sought out the family they were separated from. This tradition would become a continuous celebration of kinship and resilience that Black families had endured. A 2018 survey showed that 68% of Americans have attended a family reunion, and 28% report holding them annually, especially in cultures where family ties hold even stronger significance. These gatherings can remain vibrant cornerstones of community and identity. So I did a poll on my Patreon, and my Patreon membership isn't huge or anything like that. I appreciate everyone who has become a member. And while I'm talking about my Patreon membership, I'm going to just go ahead and encourage anybody who wants to become a Patreon member to head over to Patreon, look for Thanks for Sharing. It's all one word, and go ahead and become a member. So I put a poll out on my Patreon page, and this is the question I asked. Summer is the time for family reunions. As you have done your personal work, do you find family reunions helpful or harmful to your recovery? Or a third option, does your family not have family reunions? So 0% checked that family reunions have been helpful to their recovery. Although I will say I talked to some clients in person over the last couple of weeks as I have been working on this podcast episode. And one particular client who is, I would say, newer into recovery mentioned that they really enjoyed family reunions and have had a couple this past summer that they've been to. And, the reasons that they found them helpful is, number one, they mentioned, I did ask their permission if I could use this as part of the podcast, and they said yes. I asked, what was helpful about it, what they found helpful. And they said, number one, some of their behavior really escalated more recently in their substance addiction. And the family, was aware of this, and they felt that at the family reunion, it seemed that, everybody treated this person the same as they always had, and that nothing was different. And that meant something to them to know that this is still their family and they're still accepting regardless of what had happened earlier. Family reunions are harmful to my recovery. That question got 33% of the answers. And my family doesn't have family reunions, 67%. So the majority of the Patreon members, again, which this is not a poll that we can really generalize to anything because it's a very small sampling, but the majority of people said my family just doesn't have family reunions. Over on my YouTube channel, I put that poll out again last week, I believe, and there was only one vote that came through on the YouTube channel. Again, that's a platform that I'm building, and so doesn't have a lot of response from people, not a ton of subscribers, which again, if you want to become a subscriber to know what is coming out, you can head over to our YouTube channel, which is under Healing Paths Recovery, and you can hit subscribe, like, share, any of those options. So there was one vote coming from YouTube that said family reunions have been harmful to my recovery. So that's kind of how the stats added up in the areas that I put out some polls. Again, those were very small numbers, and so nothing that we can generalize out. But did you know there is a term for people who fear meeting relatives? And this term is syngenesphobia. So there is a term for this. It's not, if you don't really enjoy getting together or meeting relatives, then there is actually a term for that. So if there's a term for something, you're probably not alone. For people with social anxiety, family reunions can be especially anxiety producing. And that's why some families choose to hold reunions every other year instead of every year. I think from what I read, the most popular option is a every year family reunion, And then, people who live at a distance or even people who are close by can attend or not attend. Oftentimes it's difficult because people tend to get nervous when they're meeting new people. And sometimes having activities at family reunions can help ease tensions and help create a new bond. Now, we do know from research that social support, whether this is from a trusted group or a valued friend or your family members, has been shown to reduce the psychological and physiological consequences of stress and can enhance immune function. In fact, the research found that people that are supported by close relationships with friends, family, or fellow members of other support groups are less vulnerable to ill health and premature death. Individuals afflicted with leukemia or heart disease have higher survival rates if they have extensive social support. There is also a strong tie between social support and measures of well-being. We know that those who have close personal relationships cope better with various stressors, including bereavement, job loss, rape, and illness. And this comes from Salovey and his research, or their research in 2000. For many, though, their family may not be the source of the support that they get in their life. Now, I think there is thinking, especially from older generations, that the younger generation does not want to continue with going and doing the work that it takes to get the family reunion together. It just doesn't seem to be as important to them as what it has been in the past. From one of the articles I read, it was quoting a mom who was from an older generation, and she was talking to her daughter who had not been to a family reunion for years. This daughter was actually the one writing the article. And her mom said, quote, "Back then, you spent your Sundays with your family. Stores weren't open, gas stations weren't open. Sunday afternoons, you would go to your grandparents. That's very rare now. And I think that's the big change. You're on the go. Sunday's more or less another day to do your chores, wash your clothes, whatever, go shopping. You would have never done that when I was a kid. Absolutely not." End quote. Now, I will say for me, that was true when I was growing up. Stores weren't open, gas stations weren't open. There wasn't, we typically went to my grandparents on Sunday, and my aunts and uncles were also at my grandparents on Sunday. So, that was also true for me. And when I was younger, my family did have some extended family reunions with, first cousins, second cousins, on and on. And I'll talk about that in a minute, my experience with family reunions. But I think also the truth is there are so many means for people to stay in touch these days that we didn't have in the past. We didn't have when I was younger, that I don't know if younger generations, including me and my generation, Gen X, and in a different way, my kids, I don't know that we necessarily understand the significance of having something like this. So with my experience with family reunions, like I said, when I was young, growing up, we had family reunions yearly on my mom's mom. So my maternal grandmother, we had family reunions on her side of the family. I remember a few, not yearly, maybe, I can think of maybe four, a handful of family reunions on my maternal grandfather's side of the family. But that didn't happen as often. My maternal grandmother's family, they were, reunions yearly. I don't recall ever having an extended family reunion. Like people from out of state did travel for family reunions, but we just typically did, an evening at a park. And so I think it was scheduled to last, for 4 hours, maybe something like that. And, when I was younger, my mom would mostly go, and she took the kids with her. I don't really recall my dad being there much, but my dad probably would have been at work or wherever my dad was, whatever he was doing. And so, typically the kids would go with mom. And, we'd sit with her family, her parents and her siblings. Everybody would bring their own picnic dinner and we'd sit with them and, um, you know, eat. And these were the aunts and uncles that I knew because I would see them most Sundays at my grandparents' house. I didn't grow up having cousins. So, there wasn't really people that I knew that I could go hang out with or go play with. And I don't really recall any organized activities other than we were at a park. So you could, go onto the basketball courts. You could, maybe if there was a volleyball net set up, might be a volleyball game. There was usually a playground, things like that to do, but after dinner, typically my mom would start talking to her cousins or second cousins, often she wanted her kids there so that she could introduce some of the family to her kids. And, I think they recognized us. We'd been introduced to them before, but I don't really know that they knew our names or really knew much about us. And, on my mom's side of the family, I think there's definitely some mental health issues that are genetic for, some of the families on that side of the family. And then also my maternal grandmother, my mom's mom, her father practiced polygamy. And I have vague memories about him. I want to say he died, so my great grandma, I don't remember if she died before my great grandfather or after. I think like one of them died when I was 7 and the other one died when I was 9. I think they were both deceased by the time I was double digits, hitting 10. I recall a few times going to their house. They had maybe now it would be considered kind of a historic house in downtown Salt Lake, close to a ballpark, like where the, B team, Utah's B team baseball team would play. Back then they had it's changed since then, but back then they had, a pretty good view when the stadium did fireworks. And so, a couple of times we would go to their house and sit in their backyard to watch the fireworks show. And I recall a couple of times being at their house on a Sunday. I didn't like going to their house, and my older sister didn't like going to their house. My maternal grandfather, I don't have a lot of memories with him, but the memories I have was he was kind of an old cranky man who thought very highly of himself and whatever he said. And often the children were relegated down to the basement because he did, I remember my mom telling me he's the type of person who wants children to be seen but not heard. And so you need to go down to the basement. And so my sister and I would go down there with, people that we really didn't know and didn't see very often. Her and I would kind of hang out and have each other's back, but we just didn't really enjoy it. And so we didn't go very often. I don't know if that's because we didn't like it and my mom knew that, or I don't know if there weren't a lot of times that everybody got together. So I'm grateful that my mom was honest with us, like with us as kids and siblings, about the fact that her grandfather was polygamist. And, that wasn't just him. He had other people in the family that he had invited into the practice. And, so we knew, sometimes there were people at family reunions that we had never seen before and kind of dressed a little different, different, more old time, and they were always introducing themselves. They're a family friend. And what we knew, because my mom was honest with us, is family friend meant they were somebody's polygamist wife. They were somehow connected to a polygamous branch of that family. And I don't think that all of my aunts and uncles even knew that. I'm trying to think if that's true. I don't think that all my aunts and uncles knew that, because I remember when my great grandfather passed away. No, 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 not when he passed away. When one of my grandma's sister's husband, he passed away, and my mom took, I think, just me and my older sister to the funeral. I don't really know why. We didn't know this person particularly well, but my mom took us to the funeral, and it became obvious that, so two of my grandmother's sisters had been married to him, in the way that they were grieving and standing at the casket, and, just the bereavement that two of them had. And I think for families that did not know that, polygamy was practiced in our family, I don't know who they thought these people were, or why people dressed like this were friends of our family. But I think pretty much at that reunion, or that funeral, sorry, which I still would have been maybe a young teen when he passed away. Like, I want to say 13, maybe even 12, but it was pretty obvious. And I think I know, because my mom would talk about it on the phone with people, with some of her siblings. I know it caused a kind of a big uproar, but it didn't stop the family reunions. And I think my mom went, well, I don't know. I was going to say, I think my mom went up until she passed away, but I don't actually know if that's true. I know that my younger sister, so she's 11 years younger than me, and I think it was either when she was maybe engaged or dating somebody seriously, or maybe just after they had gotten married, she took him to one of the family reunions. And he and I were talking about this just a couple weekends ago. And he was saying, like, those reunions were weird, right? And we were just laughing about it, because they were. And so I want to say, by the time I was 15, 16, I didn't go to the family reunions anymore. And there were, younger kids that my mom would take with her. She didn't, really, she wasn't upset if we didn't go. And so I don't know even if I went to another family reunion after I was like 15, 16. I don't know if I ever went to another one. I might have. I think my husband's been to one or two. Again, kind of like, yeah, come see this show. So maybe I went to a few after I was married, but not, it just wasn't something that was pleasant or fun, or I didn't really get to know anybody. I think that's, and I'll talk about that. I think sometimes when there's some dysfunction in families, or secrets, when there's family secrets, I think that can change the atmosphere of a family reunion. And it's not really about making connections and celebrating the history, or sharing things about other people. It's not really like that when there's secrets in the family. So if you dread family events, you're not alone. Gathering with relatives can bring up unpleasant memories. It can reignite sibling rivalry, can highlight unresolved conflict and past resentments. And, the more you replay those old stories, or relive some of those old dynamics, the more stuck and angry you can be, especially following a family reunion. Now, you might have lots of reasons for skipping family events and skipping reunions entirely. Experiencing social anxiety around family is probably more common than most of us think. Sometimes loved ones aren't shy about asking you too many questions or meddling in your personal life. You may even have family members who are disrespectful and rude. If you decide to go to a family reunion, it is important to know what your boundaries are and how you will respond if, or maybe when, certain family members cross them. Now, there may be certain people that you want to completely avoid at a family reunion. It's good for you to know ahead of time if you're going to go. You may also find certain people that will be there that can be a strength or a positive connection for you. I do think it can be helpful to do some prep work in advance if you decide to go. Things like envisioning yourself walking away from people, speaking up. What are you going to say when a boundary is crossed? And determining how long it is best to stay and what your exit strategy is. Family get togethers can aggravate stress, they can aggravate anxiety, and they can create conflict. While we might be grateful to have time with loved ones, we can also experience feelings of grief, regret, or resentments from old wounds. Whether it's the pressure to meet expectations, unresolved conflicts, or simply the dynamics of diverse personalities that are coming together, these gatherings can take a toll on your mental well being. If you, like I was saying, if you decide to go to a family reunion, if your family has them, it can be helpful to journal the process in making your decision. And then also write your reflections afterwards. This can be helpful in processing the emotions that you have and whether your predictions were accurate, what your takeaway is. Practice self-compassion as you journal and go through this process. So many people experience shame, frustration, or sadness when family gatherings do not go as expected. People can create stories that they are the problem, or this is they are the only ones that struggle with this. The very feelings that you feel the need to suppress in order to make everyone comfortable can come rushing up, which is what can make family reunions so difficult. I will also add, family reunions are not the time to address some of these dynamics. They're not the time to open these wounds and openly talk about it. Even as those emotions that come from those dynamic or those wounds are rushing up and you're very aware and feeling them in that moment. Let's also I want to talk in this episode about family estrangement. So more than 1 in every 4 American adults are estranged from a family member. Family cutoff is common and can often be a healthy choice. If you don't believe me, you can go to TikTok and look at the hashtag. I think it's hashtag no family contact. It might also be hashtag family estrangement. You can also go to Reddit. Reddit has a rabbit hole that you can go down with a lot of people talking about why and how they ended up in family cutoff. So, like I was saying, family cutoff can be a healthy choice when there's toxic parenting, when there's been abuse or mental health issues or addiction within the family. Family members might choose to go no contact due to abuse or neglect, mental illness, or drug and alcohol use. When choosing no contact, it may be necessary to take certain measures for your protection. And I think it's also important to understand, I wasn't reading the article because it was behind a paywall, but I would say within the last month, an article came up on one of my threads, and it was from a major, newspaper, online newspaper, Washington Post, New York Times, I don't recall which one. And I just saw the title and then I was reading some of the comments, which is what I'll do if the, article is behind a paywall. And the title said something to the effect of, is cutting off your parents going to be something you regret as an adult child? Something to that effect. And in the comments, it was clear. Some of the people, you could tell the different generations in the comments. Some of that from their profile picture. And those of older generations who maybe there has been some family cutoff, or maybe they have been cut off, were very much against it. Like, absolutely not. That is never acceptable. Kind of going with some of those platitudes about how, your family raised you. They put a they gave you a home, a roof over your head, they fed and clothed you. So, there was, and some of the guilt that came with some of those comments, or they were trying to guilt people. And then, there were people, I would say, from younger generations saying, absolutely, if that's going to be healthy for you and you know why you're doing it and what you might benefit from, then it's absolutely an acceptable option and not one that you'll regret. It talked about, some of the comments were saying things like, if the people who abuse you haven't really changed or made amends, then you don't owe them a relationship. Things like that. Those were some of the comments. So, I don't think that estrangement, we know, not just that I don't think, but we know that estrangement is never just an isolated incident. It's not like a one-time thing happens and estrangement comes out of that. It's usually a combination of many factors, and the trauma can spread both deep and wide, potentially creating a psychological landmine that fundamentally affects every other emotional connection the person has. Many people who choose to go to family cutoff or for estrangement from their family, they view the cutoff as a matter of survival, the only avenue to health, happiness, and personal growth. I've had clients who have said, as they are opting for family cutoff, this was the best thing I could do in order to get sober, or in order to get into recovery. I needed to cut contact with my family. But there are emotional consequences of estrangement that can be profound, including feelings of loneliness, sadness, confusion, and there can be a profound sense of loss. Estranged family members can also experience a loss of identity and belonging, which can impact their self-esteem and overall mental health. It's surprising that there is not more research. Well, it's surprising and it's not surprising that there is not more research out there about family estrangement. And, I think there's reasons for that. I think for people who have opted for family estrangement or family cutoff, they don't really want to talk about that. They don't know how other people are going to react. They don't know if participating in a research study and having to answer a questionnaire is going to churn up all these things that they're trying to kind of tap down. I think also for the people who have been cut off, that's not something they really want to talk about. And often they create stories about the cutoff that can be exaggerated or completely inaccurate. We know that factors that drive estrangement include mismatched expectations, clash of values, and emotional abuse. Now, estrangement is not necessarily permanent. Some cutoffs range in the less than 6 months range, but they can also go over 30 years. Adult children often wish their parents were more positive. They still long to have that relationship. They wish their parents were unconditionally loving, warm, and that they could be emotionally close. Estrangement that separates family members violates the norms and ideals with which society regards family unity. Kylie Aglias, who's an Australian social worker and scholar, is one of the foremost experts on the subject and is author of the internationally acclaimed groundbreaking book, Family Estrangement, A Matter of Perspective. She says, quote, "Family estrangement is larger than conflict and more complicated than betrayal. It is entwined in contradictory beliefs, values, behaviors, and goals, and is the result of at least one member of the family considering reconciliation impossible or undesirable. The cessation of family relations, whether that involves rejection or deciding to leave, can be an inordinately traumatizing experience." One British organization, Standalone, has focused on young adults who are experiencing family estrangement. The organization has supported groundbreaking research that uncovers the numbers and statistics behind the painful psychological consequences of family breakdowns. In its most significant study in the last 10 years, Stand Alone collaborated with Lucy Blake from the Center of Family Research at the University of Cambridge in England. The research surveyed 807 people, mostly from the United Kingdom, United States, Canada, and Australia, who identified themselves as being estranged from their whole family or a key family member, such as a mother or a father, siblings, or children. Here are some of the key findings that they found. So, why estrangement occurs. The factors cited most often as leading to sibling relationship breakdown include mismatched expectations about family roles and relationships, clash of personality or values, emotional abuse, parental favoritism, traumatic family event, or a traumatic event. The factors cited often as leading to adult children estranging themselves from parents include emotional abuse, mismatched expectations about family roles and relationships, clash of personality and values, neglect, issues relating to mental health problems, and a traumatic family event. The length of time of estrangement. Like I said, estrangements are not necessarily permanent. The variation in the length of estrangement ranges, like I said, from 6 months to more than 30 years. So they found estrangements between respondents and their fathers had gone on for the longest period of time, averaging 7.9 years. Estrangements between respondents and their daughters had lasted the shortest length of time, averaging 3.8 years. Estrangement cycling. Family members often cycle in and out of estrangement, they found. Respondents who cut contact with a parent reported doing so at various ages across the lifespan, with most having done so in their late 20s or early 30s. 80% felt there had been some positive outcomes of their experiences of estrangement, such as greater feelings of freedom and independence. The stigma of sibling estrangement. 68% of respondents across genders, ages, and all kinds of estrangements felt that estrangements carries a stigma. Among the reasons are the following: judgmental opinions and assumptions surrounding fault and blame, a contradiction between expectations of family life and reality, blood is thicker than water regardless of intolerable conditions, a lack of understanding or life experience. And then they looked at what the estranged are looking for in their relationships. Adult children wish their mothers were more positive, unconditionally loving, warm, and emotionally close, more loving and respectful, less judgmental and critical, and able to recognize their hurtful behavior. Adult children wish their fathers were more positive, unconditionally loving, warm, and emotionally close, willing to stand up to an offending spouse, partner, or other family member who supports divisiveness, more interested in them. Sisters wished their siblings were more positive, unconditionally loving, warm, and emotionally close, in closer contact to show concern for how they're doing, more understanding, more respectful, less judgmental, and less critical. Brothers wanted a more loving relationship with a sibling who is more positive, unconditionally loving, warm, and emotionally close, maintains closer contact, communicates better. So if you didn't notice this pattern across the board, they wanted a positive, unconditionally loving, warm, and emotionally close relationship. And that stood out to me. I would say in my family, I wish for that. A couple of weeks ago, I had a conversation on the phone with my youngest sibling, my brother. And I have 3 brothers, but my youngest sibling is also a brother. And, I just noticed over the last couple of years, him and his family come to less family events. We also have less family events. Typically, I've talked before about my role as kind of being a parentified person that takes care of my siblings. And so, most of the time, even when my mom was alive, most of the time I planned the events, or my mom might, text me or call me and say, "Hey, why don't you plan something?" The last couple of years of her life, we tended to do something the first Sunday of every month, and whoever could make it could make it, but that was kind of a scheduled event. And most of the times I had them at my house, and, I prepared the bulk of the food. I would say maybe in the last 8 to 10 years, it's been a mix where, sometimes we did do birth order. And so we would just kind of go in the birth order, and whoever was next hosted that month and, put out to everybody what they were doing, the time, et cetera, et cetera. And we would get together. I would say more recently, we just haven't done much, unless it's like the holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas. Really, those are the holidays that we get together. And some of that, I stopped trying to do it. I would take my turn. I would kind of keep track month to month when it was my turn, and I would put something out like, "Hey, it's my turn to host. Let's do it this day. Who's in town? Let's do this time," whatever. But nobody else took their turns. It just didn't happen. And so I thought, well, maybe people don't want to do this. Like, I don't want to force people into something if they don't want to do this. And so I just stopped doing it. And this year, my family hasn't gotten together since Christmas. And I've had a couple of my nieces and nephews come to me as they're, older. Two of them graduated high school this year. And they came to me and said, like, "How come we never get together anymore?" And I said to them, like, I didn't know people wanted to. Like, it's pretty much me planning them and putting it out there. And they didn't disagree, but they've all said to me, "I like to get together. It matters to me." But they didn't say if it mattered to their parents or not. I've had a conversation with another sibling who just said, "I think I've come to a point of accepting that, in a family with 6 siblings, we're not all going to be close to each other. And I have to accept that that's just a reality." I think I know that it's harder for me to accept that. So I had just, texted this brother and told him, like, "Hey, I've noticed that you and your family are not here very much. And not that we're having a ton of family activities, but you guys don't come to a lot of them. And I'm not judging that. I want to be respectful of whatever boundary is in place. But I just wanted you to know that I've noticed and that your family's absence is missed." And, he responded pretty quickly with a text, and we texted for a little bit, and then we decided to schedule a phone call. And I would say we had a good phone call. I mostly listened. I wanted to hear what was going on for him, and he said many of these things on this list, like, we're not close. He said, "I think after Mom died, I realized our relationships are pretty empty with each other as siblings. And I don't like that. I don't like feeling that. I don't like being reminded of that." It's not uncommon. He and I have talked about this a couple of times over the years. And I've seen this. I've tried not to do this, but, sometimes the youngest in the family doesn't get past being the baby in the family or the youngest in the family, and isn't often recognized for being the adult that they are, and their accomplishments in life and professional accomplishments, as well as having a family of their own. And I know he has felt that at times. I didn't have any solutions. I told him that I agree with him that often I think our relationships are somewhat hollow and empty. I simply said to him, I think, when you grow up with family secrets and you have to be a secret keeper while at the same time putting on a front to the outside world that everything is fine in our family, we don't really have a lot of time to develop who we are And it doesn't feel safe to share that with each other. And I wish that it did. And, he agreed. I don't know that, we feel like there's a whole lot that we can do about it. But I think he and I will, try to have more contact. And, there's some things that we are different on. And he talked about that. Like, my family has gone through a faith deconstruction. He hasn't. And, some of that has been hard for him or even offensive to him. And, I think he has his perspective that isn't necessarily my perspective. And that's okay. We don't have to be the same. We don't have to see things the same. He and I often talk about, like, he had different parents than I did. I think he was 7 when our parents divorced. And he didn't really have contact with dad after that because, dad was avoiding paying child support. Back then, if he dodged paying child support until the youngest was 18, child support just disappeared. That's not the case anymore. But back then, that was the case. And my dad was successful at doing that. And so we didn't really see him for a span of years. And, he had a mom post-divorce, which, I've said this to him. I don't know if that's better than having a mom pre-divorce in an unhealthy and unsatisfying relationship, but it's different. And so we can acknowledge there's different experiences. We had different parents and we're different people. And that shouldn't come in the way of having unconditionally loving and warm and emotionally close relationships. Now, I think in our family, like in a lot of dysfunctional families, the emotions aren't talked about. The emotions might be explosive. They might lead to violence, but that doesn't mean we know how to be close with each other. And I think I've learned how to do that differently in my own family that I've created. And I think he is learning how to do that in the family he has created. But it's still hard to bridge that gap with siblings. I want to end this podcast episode with a quote from Jonathan Franzen, who authored the book, The Corrections. He says, "Every family is a ghost story. The dead sit at our tables long after they have gone." At the end of this episode, I want to remind you that your story matters. Remember, there's something meaningful in every chapter. Don't wait to share your story until it's finished. Until next time, Jackie.